let's start with the first one. It's an Icelandic. Is there a plan to make it mandatory for the pension fund to only invest in green bonds or green companies? Is there a plan to make it mandatory?
I can start. No, it's not. It will be mandatory to examine, explain, and manage the risk regarding sustainability, and explain which part of the portfolio is based on sustainable criteria and which not.
So we could say, even though it's not mandatory, we are moving into that direction by demanding that there will be some risk assessment for this type of risks.
Yeah, we need to make our risk assessments, and probably it's very good investment opportunities. And if you can reduce risk but get the same return, you're doing a great job as an asset manager. So this is a question about common language and methods, how to deal with the sustainability issues, not that everything shall be green or gray or something.
Thank you. Let's just go to the next one. The second most popular, or the most popular now, is, I guess this would be most relevant for Daniel. Is continued economic growth still relevant or even physically possible in a finite world? Should we move towards regrowth? I guess this is a question of should we aim for some kind of sustainable growth without any rise of emissions, or should we aim for degrowth?
I can maybe reply saying that whatever we propose to our society has to be a prosperity proposition. And then two thoughts around the particular question. One is that we can have a look at how we are measuring growth. Is the GDP really capturing what we wanted to capture? So we need to look at that. And second, is degrowth an option? This is, of course, a very ideologically loaded question. And without saying that my organization would think this, what I personally think is that it would be very difficult to convince citizens that degrowth is the pathway. It might be easier to tell them we may have to degrowth certain activities so that we can grow others, and this helps that transformation that we are talking about. So a double response. On the one hand, changing the way we measure GDP could help unpack the situation better. And second, rather than just going for degrowth, going for a more nuanced understanding of that concept within the economy.
Just to pick out this one thing about measuring growth, are there any plans like at the National Bank, Tinna, if I can ask you, somehow to assist or to support, developing new indicators that would more or less, replace the GDP or these economic growth measurements that we use today?
Well, the government already has these welfare indicators that the Statistics Institute of Iceland is collecting, and of course, as that project gets more advanced, we can collaborate on that. But currently, we're just following our role in assisting. Yeah.
So we are at least moving somewhere. That's clear. Let's take the next one. It's an Icelandic. I guess it would be, could be a good question for Benedikt. Climate change is hitting women harder or in a more severe way than men or women or girls. What's Iceland doing to secure that women, have their stake in decision making regarding climate issues?
So gender is a sort of a fundamental pillar in all our international development cooperation. So we've been emphasizing gender equality for decades. But to the question more specifically, what we have been doing in the past years is to actually support programs that actually economically empower women in particularly something like the energy sector. We think that is important. It's also important to bring to that some of these projects, actually some of our alumni who have been through the GROW or UN schools that are hosted in Iceland, like on gender, geothermal, fisheries, etc. We can actually leverage those alumni into some of these programs to bring them into it. But the main focus really is, women and children are what we call the last mile when it comes to actually taking out energy poverty. That's the last mile. Those are the people who actually suffer the most. So by emphasizing, the reduction in energy poverty per se, we actually believe that we are addressing that issue specifically.
So would you say that we are moving forward? We are getting closer to some kind of goal in this?
Not according to the UN, if we're going to reach this in 300 years, for sure. No, but by putting up a different lens to actually begin to sort of specialize or focus on specific sectors, we believe, and not only sectors, but also, the economic empowerment of women through supporting programs that support their women as entrepreneurs, their agri-food businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So to be more specific and focused on that, I think we can say that we are.
Thank you. Let's take the next one. Just the next one on the list. I guess this would be for Daniel. Which risk do we think is more important, fiscal risk or transitional risk, in the context of the Icelandic economy?
I'm trying to interpret exactly what the question is about, and I would say that policies have focused for many years on climate mitigation, so trying to revert greenhouse gas emissions, as we saw also on my own slides, while now it's clear that climate adaptation, resilience is very important to manage the risks that will come from the climate that is changing and will be changing in the next 50 years. So this will also be an incredible endeavor and a lot of investment required. But when we are transitioning to a different business case for our societies, we will also have to invest a lot to lubricate that change in a way that makes it work. So I think we should not say that one is more important than the other. It's really something that we need to balance across the two. That would be my take.
I can also chip in here. I think it's very hard to rank order the two, like you said, but it's clear that we have less control of our physical risk in the short term, and we can really manage the transition risk by engaging in an orderly transition. But if we have a lack of clear actions or goals, then we can have an exponential increase in the transition risk. So it's very important to think about that when we're designing our actions and plans.
Thank you. Let's take the next one. The next on the list. I guess it could be for Tómas. The majority of all companies are small and medium-sized. What's the best way to support them in adapting to new laws and regulations regarding sustainability? Just to add, or do these laws and regulations not apply to these companies?
It depends. Taxonomy does not apply to small companies, but the new regulations regarding, or directives regarding sustainable information will do.
Like CSRD?
CSRD, Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive. It's a lot of alphabet soup. But what's important for small companies is to start the learning process as soon as possible. Because even though they are not, these regulations are not applicable to them, they are part of bigger value chain of big companies. So big companies which are buying products and services from the small companies need this information. So what I would recommend to small and medium-sized companies is start the learning process and focus on a materiality, where they can have most effect on the value chain of bigger company or their own value chain, and make most effect in dealing with the sustainability issues. Because it's often very good, profitable business opportunity to find there.
Do you think we are well enough prepared for these changes? Like, are the people out there having some capacity or having some knowledge to assist the companies in moving into this sort of new era?
We might be in a better position, but a lot of things has changed for last maybe 12 or 18 months, and I think the implementation of this EU laws in Icelandic law will help to speed up the process. But we need to act now.
Yeah. Let's move to the next one. For Daniel, regarding research on decoupling on a national basis, does carbon leakage get well accounted for in general in decoupling research?
This is an interesting topic which I touched upon very superficially when I was speaking. Indeed, if we only look at decoupling locally and there is complete coupling elsewhere, it will not really work. This is when I was saying we need to be assertive to our trading partners. There is now policy recognition for that. We have a carbon border tax adjustment in the European market, which recognizes that we need to ask for a comparable environment and climate approach to our trading partners. How can we support that with research is a very vast, immense topic, and there is a lot of science trying to unlock that with the life cycle assessment as a tool that looks into the emissions that are generated across the value chain. It is still estimations very often, but there is a lot happening there, and we need to do more so that we can then have good arguments for that assertive approach that I was calling for. Yeah. So it's a very interesting question indeed.
So we would need like a stronger focus on scope 3 emissions.
We need to see the emissions that we are bringing to our continent by buying things, and we need to also manage the reduction of these emissions. Europe is an important player, but it's relatively small, both in economic terms, but more so in greenhouse gas emission terms. Mm-hmm. So we cannot do this alone.
Then there's one political question maybe. The heavy industry policy of the state is polluting much more, as it's phrased here, or let's say have more emissions than the whole fleet of cars. Why is nobody talking about, reducing the production of the heavy industry to sort of reduce the total emissions? I don't know if you can answer this, but are we not talking about this, or is it forbidden?
If I can just, one of the targets that were set out in the SDGs, in the Sustainable Development Goals, was actually to strengthen energy efficiency in industries, in sectors. Mm-hmm. And we sometimes think that we as a country are doing really well when it comes to SDG 7. The fact is, however, that we actually are not doing enough on energy efficiency, and that relates to this specific question. We need to do a lot more when it comes to go through energy efficiency to use the energy that we have in the sort of industrial sectors than we do. And it's really in some ways strange that we are at this position, because I think we're one of the lowest in Europe when it comes to this. And this is one of the 3 targets of SDG 7, which we signed on to.
Yeah. To start with, I think that the question is based on the thought that we have a lot of heavy industries. Okay, it's quite energy efficient, but you might have to reduce the production because most of the emissions are production based. But then, of course, the question arises: would it be any better if someone else would do it with less energy efficiency? We can leave this, but I guess it's an important question for a country where, let's say, 40% of the non-LULUCF emissions are originated from the heavy industries.
The point is only this: if you really strengthen your energy efficiency in your sectors, you actually can then produce same amount that you're doing with less energy, and that would be a saving in itself. So, it's not. I'm not addressing the issue if we need to reduce the total amount of production, but we can do it more efficiently, and that's what we're not doing.
Yeah.
But I can maybe add some thoughts there. We did some research in our organization a few years back trying to understand exactly what you said, what happens with the additional production of any commodity or any product at global scale. Is this being relocated to other parts of the world? So then what we have on the one hand is increasing consumption in volume in Europe. So we are getting richer and we consume more quantity. And the production level at European scale is more or less stable for many, many industries. But this additional consumption, we are consuming it from elsewhere. So there is growth of production in other places of the world. So in that context, I think what he was saying was wise. We need to try and transform our industry in a way that can continue producing things in a lower environment cost. So far, we've been doing this with an incremental change mentality. So for instance, when it comes to industrial emissions, you try to use this best available technique. You revise that every few years, and then you revise the operating conditions of your industry, and there is investment, continuous improvement. It will not cut the cake anymore. We will need to look into energy-intensive industries and change basically the energy mix that they use. And this is a complete rethinking of their operations.
We can continue with this because I guess the next question is to some extent related to this one. It says, in Iceland, the economy is based on fishing, aluminium smelting, tourism, and innovation. How can we decouple here? Like, I guess this goes not least for fishing and aluminium smelting or aluminium production. How can we decouple here if we already are using the best available technology?
It's a very difficult question because indeed we need to do this and we need to do it fast. When it comes to tourism, we are talking about international flights. In the case of Iceland, there is no other practical way to get here, that's for sure. And if we only think in using, for instance, biofuels, we would generate immediately a huge trade-off in terms of biodiversity impact. So it's not an easy question to resolve. But certainly there are emerging ideas in every industry that can improve massively its environmental performance. We don't have time to go to specific solutions, I guess.
Okay, then there are like more sort of Icelandic questions, like there's a reference to the COVID times. Then we had 3 people we called þríeyki, like a team of 3 people. I don't know the English word. A team of 3 people were, advising us how to do and actually demanding us to do things in certain ways. The question is, would we need this kind of þríeyki, a team of 3 people, to advise us in climate issues or to steer development in the right direction? Because it worked during COVID. Maybe Tómas.
Okay, I can try to answer this. I think this, fortunately, the COVID was a short competition, short run. Mm-hmm. But this sustainability issues is a long run, and it is in a way a group sport, like football or handball or baseball. You need everyone in the team to be capable, to be a leader in a way. So I think it's more question of get everyone on board and get everyone to try to do its best, because it is in a way an infinite game. It will not end after maybe 12 months, 30 months like COVID did. So I think we need all on board. Mm-hmm. It depends if you're investors, working in companies, teaching in schools, we need all on board. So, but there were specialists which the previous panel which would probably be better to answer this question. So it's about behavioral economy, probably. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just about to conclude this session, but there are 2 questions here that are basically focusing on the National Bank. I would try to combine them. One of them is, what are the climate risks of the National Bank? And shouldn't the central bank focus on its core mandate, particularly price stability and inflation, considering the current economic situation? I understand this question like, why should you bother about climate issues? Isn't it your primary task to deal with inflation and that kind of stuff? What would you say, Tinna?
Well, I think, as I mentioned in my speech, that we must understand that climate change and climate-induced risks are deeply connected to the core mandate and, in fact, inseparable from it. And we see that it directly affects price stability. If we just take a current example, we see that Europe is going through great economic challenges, and they are caused by an energy crisis. And this energy crisis is linked to climate action, for example, and transition risks that follow when we change from, for example, coal to natural gas. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, it just means we have to be aware of what happens and really must increase awareness and knowledge of how a country's energy mix is affected by geopolitical shocks. This will become more relevant as we go, so this is definitely something we have to take into consideration. The next question, I think the correct phrasing would rather be what are the climate-related risks that the central bank is concerned about, just regarding the whole country. And if you think about physical risks, we of course have, I'm out of time, okay. We of course have melting glaciers. They can change the routes of rivers, causing damages. We have warmer ocean, more acidic ocean, that will have effect on our fishing. We have warmer temperatures that increases the risk of invasive species, threatening our biodiversity. Also more risk of dry seasons, droughts, that will increase risk of forest fires, and those are the physical risks, like wrapped up. Of course, there are more. And then related to transition risks, that is, risks following transition to a net zero society. And there we have sectors that we must get better at, and that could be the construction sector, production, and transportation, something that we must really reduce emissions in, but might cause challenges.
So maybe the conclusion from this would be, like, these risks are so interrelated that you cannot separate climate risks from, like, what you would call it, infrastructure-related risk or investment risks. It's all more or less the same risk. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the time is out, so thank you very much. And before we start doing